The morning sun split the Philadelphia sky into ribbons of gold and amber, but inside the gates of Oakmont Cemetery, shadow ruled. White canvas drapes hung from iron scaffolding, creating a theater of grief beneath the sprawling oak trees. The air carried the scent of fresh earth and something sharper, something chemical, that workers had poured into the grave an hour before dawn. Cement thick and gray lined the bottom of the pit like a final insult to anyone who might claw their way out. The casket gleamed. Pure gold fixtures caught the light, throwing it back at the 100 faces gathered in concentric circles around the open grave. Every person wore black. Some wore expensive black silk and cashmere that whispered wealth with every movement. Others wore department store black polyester that bunched at the shoulders. But all of them shared the same expression that carefully constructed mask people wear when death visits the powerful. Samantha Fairchild lay inside the casket with her hands folded across her chest, fingers laced together as if in prayer. Her skin held that waxy quality of the carefully embalmed pale as winter moonlight. Someone had dressed her in a dove-gray suit, the kind she wore to quarterly earnings calls, and placed a single white rose between her palms. Her eyes were closed, her lips pressed together in a line that could have been peace or could have been the mortician's final adjustment. At the head of the casket, Peter Fairchild stood with his shoulders squared and his jaw set. He wore a black suit that probably cost more than most people earned in a month, tailored so perfectly it looked like it had been painted onto his frame. A white handkerchief peeked from his breast pocket, and every few minutes he would reach up and dab at the corners of his eyes. The gesture looked practiced, like something he had rehearsed in a mirror. The crowd shifted. Someone coughed. A woman in a purple coat twisted her wedding ring around and around her finger, the gold band catching light with each rotation. 3 rows back, a man in a gray suit checked his phone, the screen's glow painting his face blue for just a moment before he tucked it away. The pastor, Samuel Green, cleared his throat and opened his Bible to a page marked with a burgundy ribbon. The words of the service washed over the gathering like waves familiar and hollow. Green's voice carried the practiced cadence of someone who had performed this ritual 1,000 times each syllable, shaped by years of standing over open graves and speaking comfort to the inconsolable. He talked about ashes and dust, about eternal rest and heavenly peace, about a life cut short, but lived well. Standard fare for a funeral, nothing that would stick in anyone's memory past the drive home. 2 cemetery workers stood off to the side, their hands wrapped around thick leather straps that would lower the casket when the time came. They wore matching gray uniforms with Oakmont Cemetery embroidered across the breast pockets. One of them, a younger man with acne scars peppering his cheeks, kept glancing at his watch. The other, older and heavier, just stared at the ground with the expression of someone who had stopped caring about the dead years ago. Behind the main gathering, near the edge of where manicured lawn gave way to wild grass and forgotten graves, a figure moved through the shadows. He wore a blue work uniform faded from too many washings with grass stains ground into the knees. His beard hung thick and untrimmed, shot through with gray that made him look older than his years. His hair curled over his collar, shaggy and unkempt. But his eyes, those were different. They burned with something that didn't match the rest of him, something bright and fierce and utterly awake. The name badge clipped to his chest read, Micah Dalton, Regional Manager, though the title was a joke. He managed nothing but mops and hedge trimmers, nothing but the endless work of keeping death tidy. His hands, calloused and scarred from years of hard labor, trembled as he gripped the handles of a wheelbarrow filled with tools. He had positioned himself at the back of the crowd, deliberately close enough to see but far enough that no one would notice him. Pastor Green's voice rose slightly, reaching for the emotional crescendo that every funeral required. He spoke about Samantha's legacy, about Vantage Tech Industries, and the thousands of jobs she had created, about her philanthropy and her vision. He called her a titan of industry, a pioneer, a woman who had shattered ceilings made of glass and steel. The crowd murmured approval. Several people nodded. Peter dabbed at his eyes again. Micah's chest tightened. His breath came shallow and quick, each inhale catching in his throat like he was drowning in air. His fingers went white around the wheelbarrow handles. Every muscle in his body coiled tight, ready to spring. He had spent the entire night rehearsing what he would say, how he would say it, but now that the moment approached, the words felt too big for his mouth. The pastor closed his Bible. The sound of the pages meeting echoed across the cemetery, final and absolute. He nodded to the 2 workers who stepped forward and began threading the leather straps under the casket. Metal scraped against metal. Someone in the crowd sobbed, a raw sound that cut through the morning stillness. Peter moved closer to the grave's edge, his jaw working as if he were grinding his teeth. The workers lifted. The casket rose 6 inches, then a foot, the straps groaning under the weight. Gold fixtures flashed in the sunlight. The white rose between Samantha's hands trembled slightly from the movement, its petals scattering drops of dew that caught the light like tears. The crowd pressed forward, everyone wanting to see this final moment, this last goodbye before Earth claimed what death had taken. Micah dropped the wheelbarrow. The tools inside clattered against each other, the sound like bones rattling in a box. He didn't care. His legs moved before his mind could catch up, carrying him forward through the crowd. People turned at the noise, confusion rippling across their faces. Someone said something, but Micah didn't hear it. His entire world had narrowed to that casket, to the woman inside it, to the terrible knowledge burning in his chest like swallowed fire. His voice tore free, ripping itself from his throat with a force that shocked even him. The word came out raw and enormous, echoing off the white canvas drapes and the marble headstones. Stop! Every head swiveled. The workers froze with the casket suspended in midair. The straps pulled taut. Pastor Green's mouth fell open, his carefully prepared words dying unspoken. Peter's face went from grief-stricken to stone-cold in the space of a heartbeat, his eyes narrowing as they found Micah pushing through the crowd. Micah didn't stop moving. His worn boots trampled the careful carpet laid over the grass. His shoulder bumped past a woman in pearls, who gasped and pulled away as if his poverty were contagious. He pointed at the casket, his hands shaking, but his finger steady as a compass, needle finding north. The next words came louder, powered by desperation and rage, and something that felt almost like hope. Don't bury her. Phones appeared in hands like magic tricks, screens glowing as dozens of people started recording. The woman in the purple coat held hers at arm's length, capturing everything. The man who had checked his phone earlier now aimed it directly at Micah, his finger stabbing the record button. This was no longer just a funeral. This was content. This was drama. This was something that would be shared and commented on and dissected by strangers across the internet. Micah reached the inner circle, the space where only family and close friends stood. Two security guards in dark suits materialized from somewhere in the crowd, their hands reaching for him, but Micah was already past them, his momentum carrying him forward to the very edge of the carpet where it met the open grave. He stopped there, chest heaving, and turned to face the entire gathering. His voice came out rough, damaged by the years he had spent sleeping under bridges and drinking from park fountains. But it carried. Every syllable reached the back rows, reached the people recording on their phones, reached Peter Fairchild, whose face had gone the color of old paper. The words tumbled out too fast and too desperate to stop. My name is Micah Dalton. Listen to me. This woman is still alive. The crowd's murmur exploded into chaos. People shouted questions that tangled together into an incomprehensible wall of sound. The guards grabbed Micah's arms, their grips tight enough to leave bruises, but he planted his feet and refused to move. Pastor Green dropped his Bible. One of the workers let go of his straps, sending the casket lurching sideways before his partner caught the weight. Peter's voice cut through the noise like a blade through silk, sharp and cold, and utterly in control. He took 3 steps toward Micah, his polished shoes clicking against the carpet with each movement. When he spoke, his tone carried the weight of authority, the certainty of a man who was used to being obeyed. Get this lunatic out of here. But Micah had not survived the streets, had not clawed his way back from the edge of suicide, had not spent every night for the past 6 months sleeping in a storage shed next to dead people's belongings just to be silenced now. He wrenched one arm free from the guard's grip and pointed again at the casket, at Samantha's still form, visible through the viewing window in the lid. His voice cracked but held. She hasn't passed. Someone gave her something. It slows the heartbeat, cools the body, fools every test. She looks dead, but she isn't. The crowd's noise changed quality, shifting from angry dismissal to uncertain curiosity. Several people leaned forward, squinting at the casket as if they might see some sign of life if they just looked hard enough. The woman in the purple coat lowered her phone slightly, her face creasing with doubt. Even the guards hesitated, their grips loosening just a fraction. Peter's control began to crack. A vein pulsed in his temple. His carefully dabbed tears had dried, leaving his eyes hard and bright. He turned to the guards and gestured sharply. "Remove him now, sir. You must respect the dead. Samantha is my wife. She has passed. We will bury her in peace." The guards pulled harder. Micah stumbled but caught himself, his worn boots skidding on the carpet. He could feel the moment slipping away, could feel the crowd's curiosity solidifying back into dismissal. They wanted to believe Peter because Peter was clean and expensive and made sense. Micah was dirty and poor and sounded insane. But he had one more card to play, one name that might crack the facade wide open. He raised his voice, projecting over the chaos with every ounce of air in his lungs. "Give her the antidote right now. Peter, you know what you did. And Dr. Mason Keating knows too." The effect was instantaneous and electric. Every eye in the crowd swung left, searching for the doctor. Mason Keating stood near the front, distinguished in his dark suit, with a stethoscope tucked into his inner pocket like a badge of authority. He was in his 60s with silver hair combed back from a high forehead and glasses that reflected the morning light. When all those eyes found him, his face drained of color. His mouth opened and closed without sound. His hands, which had been clasped calmly in front of him, began to shake. Pastor Green held his Bible against his chest like a shield, his voice coming out small and uncertain. "Peter, should I continue the ceremony?" Peter didn't answer immediately. He was staring at Micah with an expression that oscillated between rage and something that looked almost like fear. Sweat beaded along his hairline despite the cool morning air. His jaw clenched and unclenched, grinding teeth together hard enough that tendons stood out in his neck. Finally, he turned to Green and bit out the words, "Continue. This is grief-induced madness." Nothing more. But Micah wasn't finished. He took 3 steps closer to the casket, close enough that he could see Samantha's face clearly through the viewing window. His voice dropped, becoming gentle, almost intimate, as if he were speaking to her alone. "Ma'am, hold on. Just hold on a little longer." Then he raised his head and swept his gaze across the entire crowd, making eye contact with as many people as he could. His voice strengthened, filling with conviction that came from absolutely knowing that he was right. "Check her mouth. Feel her wrist. Warm her chest. She's still here. I heard their plan with my own ears." Peter talked about a quick burial. Dr. Mason signed the papers without a real examination. "Please, anyone give her the antidote before it's too late." The silence that followed felt heavy enough to crush stone. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath, leaving the white drapes hanging limp and still. The crowd stood frozen in a tableau of shock and uncertainty. Phones continued recording their red lights, blinking like distant warning signals. The 2 workers still held the casket, suspended, their arms trembling from the sustained effort. A woman stepped forward from the front row. She was elderly, perhaps 70, with hair styled in elegant silver waves and eyes that had seen too much loss to fear scandal. She wore a black dress with a diamond brooch at the collar, and when she moved, she carried herself with the kind of authority that comes from old money and older grief. Her voice came out clear and firm, cutting through the uncertainty. "If there is any chance, we should check. What harm could it do?" Peter rounded on her, his control fracturing completely. His face flushed red and his hands balled into fists at his sides. The word exploded from him, "Unnecessary. We have done everything possible. The doctor has confirmed it. I have mourned. We must proceed." But the woman's words had broken the spell. Other voices rose from the crowd, tentative at first, then growing stronger. "Let them check. It costs nothing." "What if he's right?" The murmurs built on each other, creating a wave of doubt that crashed against Peter's certainty. People began nodding, elbowing each other, whispering behind raised hands. The phones tilted forward, their cameras zooming in on Peter's increasingly panicked face. Dr. Keating tried to regain control, his professional demeanor settling over him like a familiar coat. He spread his hands in a gesture of reasonableness and smiled, though the expression looked strained around the edges. "This is absurd. Grief makes strangers say nonsense." I examined her thoroughly. "I signed the death certificate. She is gone. We must let her rest." Micah turned to face the doctor directly. The distance between them couldn't have been more than 10 feet, but it felt like an ocean. Micah's voice came out quiet, almost conversational, but every word landed with the weight of stone. "Dr. Keating, she gave you a hospital. She funded your research. She bought you that Mercedes in the parking lot. She trusted you with her life, and you betrayed her." Something flickered in Keating's eyes, something that could have been guilt or fear or both. His gaze darted sideways to Peter, seeking guidance or reassurance or escape. Peter gave the smallest shake of his head, a gesture so subtle that most people missed it. But Micah saw it, and several others saw it, and the phones caught it. The woman who had spoken before Samantha's Aunt Helen, as it would later be revealed, took another step forward. Her voice carried steel beneath its cultured tones. If you are so certain she is deceased, then checking will do no harm. Let this man try. If he is wrong, we proceed. If he is right, then God has granted us a miracle. Either way, we honor Samantha by being certain. The crowd's murmur transformed into something close to agreement. More people nodded. The security guards looked at Peter for direction, their hands still on Micah but no longer pulling. One of the workers, the younger one, set down his end of the casket's strap and stepped back, wiping his palms on his gray pants. Pastor Green clutched his Bible and said nothing, his face reflecting the terror of a man watching his carefully ordered world dissolve into chaos. Micah seized the moment. He knelt beside his abandoned wheelbarrow and pulled out his jacket, the worn denim one with patches at the elbows that he wore during cold nights. He folded it quickly into a makeshift cushion and held it up. Please, help me lift her just a little. She needs air. Then open her mouth. One drop, that's all it takes. One drop of the antidote and she'll breathe again. Peter lunged forward, his composure shattering like glass. His voice came out as a roar. Stop this now! This is desecration. This is madness. I will not allow it. But Aunt Helen moved faster. She positioned herself between Peter and the casket, her small frame somehow creating an impassable barrier. Her eyes flashed with something fierce and protective. You will stand down, Peter. This is my niece. If there is even the smallest possibility that she lives, we will explore it. Step aside. The crowd held its breath. Peter and Helen stared at each other, locked in a silent battle of wills. For a moment it seemed Peter might push past her, might do something violent and desperate. His hands twitched at his sides. His breathing came fast and ragged. But then he saw the phones, saw the dozens of cameras recording his every movement, and something in him deflated. He stepped back, his face settling into a mask of wounded dignity. Two women emerged from the crowd. One was young, perhaps 30, in a simple black dress with her hair pulled back. The other was middle-aged, heavy-set, with kind eyes that were red from crying. They moved to the casket without speaking, their hands reaching for the brass handles. A young man in an expensive suit joined them, then an older man with military bearing. Together, they began to lift. The workers had already loosened the straps so the casket rose smoothly. They lifted it just high enough for Micah to slide the folded jacket underneath Samantha's neck, tilting her head back slightly. The movement was gentle, reverent, as if they were handling something infinitely precious and infinitely fragile. When they set the casket back down, Samantha's throat was exposed. Her head angled back in a position that would allow gravity to help if there was anything to help with. Up close, the truth became harder to ignore. Samantha's skin held no warmth, but neither did it have the cold rigidity of true death. Her lips, though colorless, had a softness to them that suggested recent life. Her eyelashes, long and dark against her pale cheeks, looked perfect, not brittle or falling out as they would after days in a morgue. And most damning of all, there were no visible signs of decay, no settling of the features, no sinking of the eyes into the skull. Micah leaned closer, his rough hands hovering over her face. His voice dropped to something almost like prayer. Ma'am, if you can hear me, hold on. Just a little longer. We're going to bring you back. Aunt Helen knelt on the opposite side of the casket, her arthritic fingers finding the small cotton plug inserted into Samantha's left nostril. The plug was barely visible, a professional touch meant to prevent leakage. Helen gripped it between her thumb and forefinger and pulled. The cotton came free easily, too easily because it was fresh. It hadn't been there long enough to adhere to anything. She held it up for everyone to see, and several people in the crowd gasped. Micah reached into his pocket. His hand closed around a small brown glass vial, the kind that might hold essential oils or medicine. The glass was old, scratched from being carried in various pockets over many miles. The label had long since worn away, leaving only the ghost of adhesive residue. He held it up so everyone could see the morning light passing through the amber liquid inside and throwing patterns across his face. The words came out steady and sure. The antidote. Her body was poisoned with something that mimics death. This will reverse it. This will bring her back. Peter lunged again, but three men from the crowd intercepted him. They didn't grab him roughly, but they formed a wall, their bodies creating a barrier between Peter and the casket. One of them, a heavy-set man with a salt and pepper beard, spoke quietly. Let him try. If it works, we'll know the truth. If it doesn't, we bury her as planned. But we have to know. Dr. Keating's voice rose high and strained. Don't. Don't put an unknown substance into her body. This is medical malpractice. This is assault. I protest this. Aunt Helen's voice cut through his objections like a blade through butter. If you are so certain she is dead, doctor, then this substance can do no harm to a corpse. Unless, of course, she isn't a corpse, in which case you have much to explain. Step back. The crowd pressed closer, forming a tight circle around the casket. Every eye fixed on the small vial in Micah's hand on the golden liquid inside that caught the light and seemed to glow. The phone zoomed in, capturing every detail. Someone in the back stood on a chair to see better. The wind picked up again, setting the white drapes to fluttering and carrying with it the smell of fresh grass and old death and something that might have been hope. Micah twisted the cap off the vial. His hands, which had been shaking throughout the entire confrontation, suddenly went steady. It was as if touching the vial had centered him, had reminded him of the purpose that brought him here. He tilted the bottle slightly, coating the glass dropper inside with the amber liquid. Then he lifted it free, holding it up to the light to check that the dropper held enough. Aunt Helen's fingers carefully parted Samantha's lips, revealing teeth that were still white, a tongue that was still pink. The young man who had helped lift the casket supported Samantha's shoulders, tilting her head back even further so her mouth opened wider. Everything moved in slow motion, each action deliberate and weighted with terrible importance. Micah positioned the dropper directly over Samantha's mouth. His hand didn't shake. His breath came slow and even. Around him, the entire cemetery seemed to have fallen into a supernatural silence, as if even the birds had stopped singing to watch. 100 people held their breath as one. 100 phones recorded the same moment from different angles. And in the distance, though no one noticed it yet, the first wail of police sirens began to echo off the city buildings. The first drop fell. It was small, just a single bead of amber liquid catching the sunlight as it descended. For a fraction of a second, it hung suspended in the air, impossibly slow, impossibly bright. Then it touched Samantha's tongue and disappeared into the darkness of her mouth. Nothing happened. Micah counted silently, his lips moving around the numbers. 1, 2, 3. The crowd leaned forward as one organism, every person straining to see some sign, some flicker of life. 4, 5. A cold wind swept through the cemetery, strong enough to set the white drapes snapping like sails. 6. Micah's hand began to tremble again. He lifted the dropper, preparing to release another drop. Peter's voice tore across the silence. Don't you dare. But Aunt Helen's arm shot out, blocking Peter's path with surprising strength. Stay where you are. Micah squeezed the dropper bulb. The second drop formed at the tip, growing larger, trembling at the edge of release. Everyone saw it building, saw it gathering mass and weight. The phones captured it in high definition, preserved it for the millions who would watch this moment over and over in the days to come. Time stretched like taffy, like honey, like the moment before lightning strikes. The drop fell, and in that infinite instant between the drop leaving the dropper and touching Samantha's tongue, something changed. A sound emerged from deep inside Samantha's chest, so faint that only those closest could hear it. It could have been wind moving through the casket's cushioning. It could have been someone's imagination. But it sounded exactly like a cough, like lungs remembering how to work, like death's grip loosening just a fraction. The drop hit. Samantha's throat convulsed. 15 years earlier, on a bright October morning in San Francisco, Samantha Chen walked into the offices of Nexus Computing with a leather portfolio under her arm and ambition burning in her chest like swallowed fire. She was 28 years old, fresh from business school, and convinced that she understood the future in a way that all these middle-aged men in their expensive suits simply didn't. The receptionist, a blonde woman with perfect nails, who looked at Samantha's discount suit with thinly veiled disdain, told her to wait in the lobby. Samantha waited for 3 hours. She sat in a chair that was designed to be uncomfortable, probably to discourage people from staying too long, and she watched executives flow past in a river of expensive fabric and entitled assumption. Most of them didn't even glance at her. Those who did see her seemed to look through her as if she were furniture or wallpaper, or some other forgettable part of the landscape. When her meeting finally happened, it lasted 7 minutes. The executive, whose name she would later forget, looked at her proposal without reading it and explained to her that the consumer technology sector was saturated. That innovation in computing was a pipe dream for people who didn't understand market realities. That she should consider a more traditional career path, maybe in marketing or human resources. He said all of this while checking his watch, his mind already somewhere else. Samantha walked out of Nexus Computing with her portfolio unopened and her ambition only slightly dented. She sat in her decade-old Honda Civic in the parking garage and made herself a promise. Someday, she thought, someday I'll build something so big that these people will remember turning me away. Someday they'll see my name and feel a sharp little pain in their chest knowing they could have been part of it. She gave herself 5 years. Actually, it took 6. Vantage Tech Industries began in the back room of a Vietnamese restaurant in Oakland, owned by Samantha's uncle, who let her use the space after dinner service ended. She worked from midnight to dawn, hunched over a borrowed laptop, living on leftover pho and black coffee. Her first employee was Rajesh Patel, a brilliant software architect who had been laid off from Oracle and couldn't find anyone else who would take a chance on him because he was 52 years old and the industry worshipped youth. They built their first prototype in 7 months. It was a cloud-based collaboration platform that made existing tools look as antiquated as telegraph machines. Samantha mortgaged her parents' house to fund production, a decision that caused her mother to stop speaking to her for a year. But the platform worked. More than worked, it sang. Within 6 months of launch, Vantage Tech had 200 corporate clients. Within a year, they had satellite offices in 4 cities. Within 2 years, they went public. Samantha Chen became Samantha Chen CEO, and then Samantha Chen billionaire, and then just Samantha, one name said, with the kind of reverence usually reserved for religious figures. Forbes put her on their cover with the headline, "The Future Wears a Smile." Time called her the architect of the collaborative economy. Wired declared her the most important technologist since Steve Jobs, which was hyperbolic, but felt good to read. Success came with its own gravity pulling people into her orbit. Investors threw money at her. Developers fought for the chance to work in her offices. Industry veterans who had once ignored her now called her on her personal line, asking for meetings, asking for advice, asking to be part of whatever she built next. She hired aggressively expanding Vantage Tech from a scrappy startup into an empire that spanned 3 continents. The company's headquarters in Philadelphia was a glass and steel monument to her vision. 15 floors of open workspace with natural light and standing desks and free meals prepared by celebrity chefs. A meditation room on every floor. A daycare center for employees' children. Quarterly bonuses that made headlines. Samantha believed in taking care of her people, in building a culture where innovation flourished because people felt valued and secure. But success also brought isolation. The higher she climbed, the lonelier the air became. Her old friends drifted away, unable to relate to her anymore, intimidated by the wealth and power that surrounded her like a force field. New friends emerged, but she could never quite trust their motives. Were they drawn to her or to what she represented? Did they see Samantha? Or did they see the billions and the influence and the chance to advance their own agendas? She was 36 when she met Peter Fairchild at a technology conference in Boston. He was giving a talk on emerging markets, his PowerPoint slides full of colorful charts and confident projections. He spoke well, his voice smooth and persuasive, his jokes landing perfectly with the audience. After his panel, Samantha approached him at the networking reception. They talked about market volatility and the challenges of scaling globally. He was funny and self-deprecating and seemed genuinely interested in her opinions rather than overwhelmed by her reputation. They had dinner that night at a restaurant where the waitstaff spoke in hushed tones and the wine list was bound in leather. Peter ordered confidently in French, which impressed Samantha even though she later learned he had simply memorized a few phrases. They talked 4 hours, the conversation flowing easily from business to personal, from ambitious dreams to childhood disappointments. Peter told her about growing up in Philadelphia's Main Line, about a father who built a modest real estate business and a mother who taught classical piano. He painted a picture of comfortable middle-class life, nothing extravagant but stable and loving. What Samantha didn't know, what she wouldn't learn until much later, was that almost everything Peter told her that night was a lie. His father hadn't built a real estate business, he had run one into the ground, and spent his final years drowning in debt. His mother hadn't taught piano. She had cleaned houses and played at church on Sundays for tips. Peter had grown up in a small apartment that smelled like mildew and disappointment, and he had spent his entire life constructing an elaborate fiction to escape it. But Samantha believed him because she wanted to believe him. After years of being surrounded by people who wanted something from her, Peter seemed refreshingly content with his own modest success. He ran a mid-sized consulting firm. Nothing spectacular but respectable. He drove a nice car, but not an ostentatious one. He wore expensive suits, but not custom-tailored. He seemed comfortable in his own skin in a way that most ambitious people never achieved. They dated for 8 months before Peter proposed. He did it during a weekend trip to Martha's Vineyard, getting down on one knee on a beach at sunset with a ring that was tasteful without being gaudy. Samantha said yes because she loved him, but also because she was tired of being alone at the top. She wanted someone to come home to someone who understood the pressure and the responsibility, someone who could be a partner in the truest sense. The wedding was small by billionaire standards, just 200 guests at a historic estate outside Philadelphia. Samantha wore a custom gown that cost more than some people's houses, though she felt slightly ridiculous spending that much on something she would wear once. Peter's family came, his mother crying happy tears and his younger brother serving as best man. Samantha's parents flew in from California, her mother finally having forgiven her for the mortgage gamble that had paid off so spectacularly. The first year of marriage was good. Not perfect, but good enough. Peter moved into Samantha's penthouse in Center City, the top 2 floors of a building with views that stretched to the horizon in every direction. He kept his consulting firm, but began working from home more often, citing the desire to spend time together. Samantha appreciated the gesture, though she noticed that Peter's business seemed to be declining. Clients stopped calling as frequently. Projects dried up. When she asked about it, Peter would shrug and say the market was volatile, that consulting was always feast or famine. By the second year, the cracks started showing. Peter began making comments about Samantha's work schedule, little digs wrapped in humor that didn't quite hide the resentment underneath. "You love those quarterly reports more than you love me," he would say with a smile, and Samantha would laugh because what else could she do? But the comments accumulated like water dripping on stone, slowly eroding something that had once been solid. Peter started attending more company events, positioning himself at Samantha's side during press conferences and product launches. At first, Samantha appreciated his support, but then she noticed how he would step forward during photo opportunities, how he would insert himself into conversations about company strategy, how he began referring to Vantage Tech as our company rather than Samantha's company. The press picked up on it, running stories that framed them as a power couple, equal partners in business and life. Except they weren't equal partners. Samantha had built Vantage Tech from nothing, had mortgaged her soul to make it succeed. Peter had contributed nothing beyond his presence and increasingly unwanted opinions. When Samantha tried to gently establish boundaries, suggesting that Peter focus on reviving his own business, he responded with wounded silence that lasted for days. The third year brought active sabotage disguised as help. Peter convinced Samantha to make him vice president of strategic development, a position that sounded important but had no clear responsibilities. He hired his college friends into middle management roles they weren't qualified for. He pushed for acquisitions that made no strategic sense but would give him more divisions to oversee. When Samantha pushed back, Peter accused her of not trusting him, of not respecting him, of treating him like a subordinate rather than a husband. Their fights became more frequent and more vicious. Peter's carefully constructed mask of supportive husband began to slip, revealing something harder and meaner underneath. He started drinking more expensive whiskey neat in a crystal glass, sitting in their living room late at night, and staring out at the city lights with an expression that looked almost like hatred. Samantha would find him there sometimes, and when she asked what he was thinking about, he would turn to her and say nothing. "Everything's fine," in a tone that made it clear everything was very far from fine. Samantha threw herself deeper into her work, spending 14-hour days at the office because it was easier than being home. Vantage Tech continued to grow, expanding into artificial intelligence and machine learning, acquiring smaller companies and absorbing their talent. But the success felt hollow now, tainted by the growing disaster of her personal life. She had built an empire, but destroyed her marriage, and she wasn't sure which one mattered more. By the fourth year, they were barely speaking. They maintained appearances in public, smiled for photographers, and gave joint interviews to business magazines. But in private, their penthouse had become a war zone of silent treatments and calculated cruelty. Peter began staying out late, coming home smelling like perfume and cigarettes, not even bothering to hide the obvious affair. Samantha didn't confront him because part of her was relieved. If he found someone else, maybe he would leave. Maybe she could be alone again, which was starting to sound better than being together. Then came Dr. Mason Keating. He was Samantha's physician, had been since she moved to Philadelphia. He was distinguished and professional with decades of experience and an excellent reputation. Samantha trusted him completely, which was why she didn't question it when he prescribed new supplements for her chronic insomnia. Just a few pills before bed, he said all natural ingredients, they'll help you sleep without the side effects of traditional medication. Samantha took the pills faithfully for 2 months. She did notice that she was sleeping better, though her dreams had taken on a strange quality, vivid and disturbing. She also noticed that she was feeling more tired during the day, needing afternoon naps that cut into her work schedule. But she attributed it to stress, to the endless pressure of running a company and navigating a failing marriage. What Samantha didn't know was that the pills contained a carefully calibrated dose of a compound that accumulated in the body over time. Dr. Keating, who owed his career to Samantha's generous donations to his hospital, had been approached by Peter with a proposal that was both elegant and monstrous. A substance that would slowly weaken Samantha's heart, making her eventual death look like natural causes. A tragedy, but not a suspicious one. And in exchange for his help, Keating would receive enough money to solve his gambling debts and keep his medical license. Keating agreed because he was desperate and because he told himself that Samantha was going to die anyway eventually, so what did it matter if he helped it happen slightly sooner? He convinced himself that this was a victimless crime, that Peter would be a good steward of Samantha's empire, that the thousands of employees would never know the difference. He signed prescriptions and monitored her declining health and told himself he was just a facilitator, not a murderer. On a Tuesday morning in late September, Samantha collapsed in her office. She had been reviewing quarterly projections when her vision tunneled and her chest tightened. Her assistant found her on the floor, her skin cold and her breathing shallow. The ambulance rushed her to Pennsylvania Hospital, where Dr. Keating was conveniently on duty. He examined her quickly and pronounced her condition grave. Heart failure, he said, though he ordered no test to confirm it. Sometimes it happens suddenly in high-stress individuals, he explained to Peter, who had arrived looking appropriately devastated. Samantha spent 3 days in the hospital, drifting in and out of consciousness. The nurses commented on how peaceful she looked, how her vital signs were weak but stable. But Dr. Keating refused to allow any specialist to consult on her case. He was her physician, he knew her medical history, he would handle everything. On the 3rd day, he administered what he told the nurses was a final attempt at cardiac stimulation. It was actually the final dose of the compound, enough to push her system into a state that mimicked death so perfectly that only the most sophisticated equipment could detect the difference. Her heart rate dropped to 2 beats per minute. Her body temperature fell. Her breathing became so shallow that it was undetectable. For all intents and purposes, Samantha Fairchild had died. Dr. Keating called time of death at 3:47 in the morning. He signed the death certificate himself, citing cardiac arrest due to natural causes. He refused an autopsy, citing Samantha's known heart condition and the family's wishes. Peter, playing the role of grieving husband, perfectly agreed that Samantha would want a quick private burial without unnecessary invasiveness. Within 18 hours, Samantha was embalmed, dressed, and placed in a casket. Within 48 hours, the funeral was scheduled. The speed was unusual but not unheard of in certain communities. And Peter had carefully cultivated the narrative that Samantha was a private person who would have wanted minimal fuss. He arranged for the burial at Oakmont Cemetery, a prestigious location where Philadelphia's elite had been interred for generations. He hired the best funeral home, ordered the most expensive casket, and invited everyone who mattered in the business world. He played his part flawlessly, the devoted husband destroyed by loss. What Peter didn't know, what he couldn't have known, was that someone had been watching. Someone who worked the night shift at the cemetery, who happened to be checking the back gate at exactly the wrong time, who overheard a conversation that was never meant to be overheard. 16 years earlier, Micah Dalton stood in the nursery of his modest house in the suburbs of Pittsburgh and painted the walls a soft yellow. His wife Emma leaned against the doorframe, her hand resting on her swollen belly, watching him work with a smile that made his chest feel too full. The room was small, barely 10 by 12 feet, but they had big plans for it. A crib in the corner, curtains with butterflies, a mobile that played lullabies. Everything a baby girl could need. Lily was born on a snowy February morning after 14 hours of labor that left Emma exhausted but glowing. Micah held his daughter for the first time in the hospital's harsh fluorescent light and felt something in him shift fundamentally. She weighed 6 pounds and 8 ounces. She had Emma's dark hair and his blue eyes. Her tiny fingers wrapped around his thumb with surprising strength, and he understood in that moment that he would burn the world down to keep her safe. The early years were hard in the way that all young families are, hard, a blur of sleepless nights and diaper changes and learning how to be parents through trial and error. Micah worked as a software engineer at a mid-sized tech company, writing code for banking applications that nobody cared about, but that paid well enough to cover the mortgage and Emma's student loans. Emma worked part-time at a cafe, bringing home free pastries and stories about difficult customers that she would recount at dinner while Lily banged her sippy cup on the high chair. They weren't wealthy, but they were happy, which felt like a kind of wealth in itself. They had a house, nothing fancy but theirs. They had a car that ran most of the time. They had enough money for the occasional dinner out and Christmas presents and a vacation every few years. Micah would tuck Lily into bed each night and read her stories about brave princesses and talking animals, and she would fall asleep with her hand clutching his finger exactly as she had the day she was born. Lily grew into a precocious child with opinions about everything. She refused to wear anything that wasn't purple. She named all her stuffed animals after types of clouds, so they had Stratus the bear, and Cumulus the rabbit, and Nimbus the elephant. She drew constantly, her art covering the refrigerator and the walls and any surface that would hold still long enough. Most of the drawings featured 3 figures, a tall one, a medium one, and a small one, all holding hands under a sun that was always yellow and always smiling. When Lily was 4, she looked up at Micah while he was pushing her on the swing set in their backyard and asked why the sky was blue. Micah tried to explain about light refraction and wavelengths in terms that a 4-year-old might understand, but Lily interrupted him halfway through. "I think it's blue because that's God's favorite color," she said with absolute certainty, and Micah laughed and agreed that yes, maybe that's exactly why. Micah's company was called Vertex Solutions, and for a while it seemed stable. The CEO was a reasonable man who understood work-life balance. The projects were challenging enough to be interesting, but not so demanding that Micah had to work weekends. The pay increased steadily, a few percentage points each year, enough to keep pace with inflation and occasionally a little more. Micah wasn't passionate about banking software, but it was a job that paid well and let him be home for dinner most nights, which mattered more than passion. Then came the crash. Not the big crash that everyone remembers, the one that took down investment banks and required government bailouts, but a smaller crash that flew under the national radar while destroying individual lives with surgical precision. Vertex Solutions had diversified into cryptocurrency consulting right before the bottom fell out of the market. Within 3 months, they had lost 60% of their clients. Within 6 months, they were filing for bankruptcy. Micah got the news on a Thursday morning via email. Subject line: Workforce Reduction Initiative. He read it 3 times before the words made sense. Effective immediately, his position was being eliminated. He would receive 2 weeks of severance pay and COBRA insurance for 3 months. HR would be in touch regarding his final paycheck and the return of company property. The email was signed by someone in corporate whose name Micah didn't recognize. He sat in his cubicle for 20 minutes staring at his monitor. Around him, other people were having similar reactions, some crying quietly, others making angry phone calls, a few already packing their personal effects into cardboard boxes. Micah's first thought was absurdly practical. How would he explain this to Lily? His second thought was darker. How would he pay the mortgage? Emma took the news better than he expected, her optimism a buoy in the sudden storm. "You'll find something else," she said while stirring pasta sauce at the stove. "You're talented and experienced. Companies are always looking for good engineers. In the meantime, I'll pick up extra shifts at the cafe." "We'll be okay." Micah wanted to believe her. He spent the next 3 months believing her, sending out resumes to every company within 100 miles that had any technology opening. He applied to positions he was overqualified for and positions he was underqualified for, tailoring his cover letter each time, obsessively checking his email for responses that almost never came. The few interviews he did get were brutal. Companies wanted younger engineers, people fresh out of college, who would work for less money and didn't have families or mortgages or any of the other complications that came with being 41 years old. The interviewers would look at his resume and nod politely and ask questions about his experience. But Micah could see it in their eyes. He was too old, too expensive, too desperate. They were just going through the motions before hiring someone else. The mortgage payments came due each month with mechanical inevitability. Micah paid the first month with his severance. The second month came from their savings. By the third month, they were dipping into the emergency fund they had built up over years, watching it evaporate with terrifying speed. Emma picked up a second part-time job at a grocery store, working early morning shifts. That meant she left the house at 5 and came home exhausted. Micah took over all the cooking and childcare, trying to maintain some semblance of normalcy for Lily, who was too young to understand why her parents were always stressed. The bills piled up. First the credit cards, their interest rates climbing as minimum payments fell behind. Then the utilities, the electric companies sending warning notices in red ink. The car payment, the insurance, the student loans that Emma had been chipping away at for a decade. Every month the pile grew higher, and every month Micah sent out more resumes that disappeared into the void. Lily started asking questions. Why couldn't they go to the movies anymore? Why didn't they have dessert after dinner? Why did mommy cry in the bathroom when she thought no one was listening? Micah tried to shield her from the worst of it, making up games about being pirates who had to be creative with limited supplies, telling her that simple meals were an adventure. But Lily was smart, and she knew something was wrong, even if she couldn't articulate what. The fight started in the 7th month. Emma came home from a double shift to find Micah sitting at the kitchen table with another rejection email open on his laptop. 98th rejection, he said without looking up. Emma set down her purse with more force than necessary. Have you tried calling people directly instead of just sending emails? Have you thought about expanding your search radius? Micah's temper, which had been building like pressure in a sealed container, finally cracked. You think I haven't thought of that? You think I'm not trying? I'm doing everything I can, and it's not enough. Okay, I can't magically make companies hire me. Emma's face hardened. Well, maybe if you had saved more money, if you hadn't bought that new computer last year, if you had been more responsible, we wouldn't be in this situation. The words hung in the air like smoke. Micah stood up in his chair, scraping against the linoleum. That computer was for work. I needed it for freelancing, which I've been doing every night to try to bring in extra money. But I guess that doesn't count because it's not a real job, right? Emma's voice rose to match his. Don't put words in my mouth. I'm working 2 jobs, I'm barely sleeping, and you're sitting here feeling sorry for yourself. They yelled at each other while Lily sat on the stairs clutching her teddy bear Nimbus, tears running down her 6-year-old face. Neither parent noticed her there. They were too caught up in their own pain, their own fear, their own desperate need to make someone else responsible for the disaster unfolding around them. The fight ended with Emma storming to the bedroom and slamming the door hard enough to rattle the pictures on the walls. That night established a pattern. They would go days being civil functioning as roommates sharing space and childcare duties, and then something would trigger another explosion. The fights got meaner, both of them learning where the other person's vulnerabilities lay and striking with precision. Emma questioned Micah's competence and masculinity. Micah questioned Emma's commitment and priorities. Both of them said things they would spend years regretting but could never take back. Lily withdrew into herself. She stopped drawing. Her teachers called to express concern about her behavior in class, how she seemed anxious and distracted, how she had started crying for no apparent reason during reading time. Micah and Emma went to a parent-teacher conference together, presenting a united front, assuring the teacher that everything was fine at home, just some temporary stress from job searching, but nothing serious. The teacher didn't look convinced. In the 11th month, the bank sent a foreclosure notice. Micah opened it while standing in the driveway, the mail still in his hand, and felt something break inside him. The house, the modest house with the yellow nursery and Lily's drawings on the walls, and a decade of memories soaked into the floorboards, was going to be taken away. They had 30 days to either catch up on the missed payments or vacate the premises. Micah walked inside and found Emma folding laundry in the living room. He handed her the notice without saying anything. She read it twice, her hands trembling, and then set it down very carefully on the coffee table. What are we going to do? Her voice came out small and scared in a way that he hadn't heard since before they got married. Micah sat down heavily on the couch. I don't know. Maybe we can find an apartment somewhere cheaper. Maybe I can take any job, even if it's not in my field. Fast food retail, whatever brings in money. Emma nodded slowly, but her eyes had gone distant. Micah recognized that look. It was the look of someone calculating whether the relationship was worth saving or if it was time to abandon ship. 3 days later, Micah came home from a humiliating interview at a phone sales company to find the house empty. Not just quiet, but actually empty, in a way that made his footsteps echo. Emma's clothes were gone from the closet. Lily's stuffed animals and books had vanished from her room. The family pictures that had lined the hallway were missing, leaving clean rectangles on the wall where dust hadn't settled. On the kitchen counter, weighted down by Lily's favorite mug, the purple one with clouds painted on the side, was a piece of notebook paper. Micah's hands shook as he picked it up. Emma's handwriting, usually so neat, looked jagged and rushed. The words blurred as his eyes filled with tears, but he forced himself to read them. Micah, I can't do this anymore. I've tried. God knows I've tried. But I'm exhausted and scared, and I can't watch our daughter grow up in this chaos. You're not a bad person. You're not even a bad husband, not really. But you've given up. I can see it in your eyes. You're drowning, and you're going to pull us down with you. I'm sorry, but I have to save Lily. I have to save myself. There's something else I need to tell you. Something I should have told you years ago, but I was afraid. Lily isn't your biological daughter. Before we met, I had a relationship that ended badly. When I found out I was pregnant, I panicked. Then I met you, and you were so kind and stable, and I thought maybe this could work. You've been a wonderful father, but she's not yours by blood. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Please don't look for us. It's better this way. Emma. Micah read the note 10 times, 20 times. The words rearranged themselves into different configurations, but the meaning stayed the same. Emma was gone. Lily was gone. And the little girl he had held in the hospital, the child whose hand had gripped his thumb, with such trust, the daughter he had read bedtime stories to for 6 years, wasn't his daughter at all. He collapsed onto the kitchen floor and screamed. The sound came from somewhere deep and primal, the kind of sound that humans make when everything that matters has been taken away. He screamed until his throat was raw, until the neighbors called the police, until 2 officers arrived and found him curled on the linoleum, surrounded by Lily's drawings that Emma had left behind. The officers were kind, which somehow made it worse. They helped him up, got him a glass of water, asked if there was someone they could call. Micah shook his head. There was no one. His parents were dead. He had no siblings. His friends had drifted away during the long months of unemployment because desperation makes people uncomfortable. The officers left him with a card for a crisis hotline and a pamphlet about depression, neither of which he looked at again. For 3 days, Micah didn't leave the house. He sat in the empty rooms and stared at the walls where pictures used to hang. He found Lily's drawings in the recycling bin and taped them back up, every single one, covering the walls like wallpaper. He slept in her room on the floor because her bed was gone, and he tried to smell her in the carpet, in the air, in the molecules that might still remember she had been there. On the 4th day, the bank sent representatives to begin the foreclosure process. They were polite but firm. He needed to leave. He packed a single duffel bag with clothes and toiletries, loaded it into his aging Honda Civic, and drove away from the house without looking back. Looking back would have destroyed him completely. The car became his home for the next 2 months. He parked in different locations each night, moving whenever security guards or police told him to leave. He washed his face in gas station bathrooms and ate dollar menu items from fast food restaurants. He kept sending out resumes from his laptop until the battery died and he couldn't afford to replace it. Then he stopped sending out resumes altogether. The descent into homelessness happened faster than he would have thought possible. The car's registration expired and he couldn't renew it. The insurance lapsed. When the car broke down on the side of the highway, Micah abandoned it there with the keys in the ignition and walked away. Everything he owned fit into the duffel bag slung over his shoulder. He was 42 years old and completely untethered from the life he had built. He spent the next 4 years living on the streets of various Pennsylvania cities. Pittsburgh first, then Harrisburg, then Philly. He learned the shelter system, the soup kitchens, the churches that handed out sandwiches on Tuesday afternoons. He learned which cops would leave you alone if you were quiet and which ones would roust you for sport. He learned how to make himself invisible, how to take up as little space as possible, how to avoid eye contact so people could pretend they didn't see you. Winter was the hardest. The cold bit through every layer of clothing he could scavenge, settling into his bones like it planned to stay forever. He slept in doorways and under bridges and in the corners of parking garages, always moving before the property owners could complain. Twice he got pneumonia. Once he got beaten by teenagers who thought it was funny to kick someone who couldn't fight back. He went to emergency rooms when absolutely necessary and left before they could get his real information. The nights were worse than the days. During the day, Micah could move, could walk around the city, could maintain the fiction that he had somewhere to go. But at night, lying on cardboard in an alley behind a restaurant, the memories would come flooding back. Emma's face when she still loved him. Lily's laugh when he pushed her on the swings. The yellow walls of the nursery. The weight of his daughter's hand in his. Except she wasn't his daughter, wasn't his, had never been his. He thought about suicide constantly. It wasn't a dramatic consideration, not some cry for help or desperate plea. It was a practical assessment of whether continuing to exist served any purpose. He stood on the Ben Franklin Bridge one night, looking down at the black water of the Delaware River, calculating whether the fall would kill him immediately or if he would have time to regret it on the way down. A homeless woman named Teresa found him there and talked him back from the edge. She was maybe 60 with a shopping cart full of belongings and eyes that had seen everything. She didn't tell him life was worth living or that things would get better. She just said that jumping was messy and that drowning was supposed to be painful, and if he was going to do it, he should at least think about the people who would have to fish his body out. The cold practicality of her argument somehow reached him in a way that empty platitudes never could. He stepped back from the railing. Teresa offered him a sandwich from her cart, and they sat together on the bridge until dawn, not talking much, just existing in parallel. When the sun came up, she shuffled away with her cart, and Micah never saw her again. But she had given him something, maybe not a reason to live, but at least a reason not to die yet. 6 months ago, Micah saw a job posting taped to the window of a corner store in North Philadelphia. Oakmont Cemetery needed a night watchman and groundskeeper. No experience necessary, no background check, cash payment weekly. It seemed too good to be true, which usually meant it was, but Micah was desperate enough to try him. He walked to the cemetery on a Tuesday afternoon, his duffel bag over his shoulder, and 6 years of homelessness evident in his overgrown beard and gaunt face. The cemetery manager, a tired-looking woman named Carol, who seemed to measure her life in paperwork and complaints, looked him up and down and sighed. "You know how to use a push mower," Micah nodded. "You know how to not steal things," another nod. Carol handed him a uniform and keys to the storage building. "You start tonight. Any problems, and you're gone immediately." Understood. Micah understood. The storage building was barely more than a shed, 12 feet by 10 feet with a cot and a space heater and a small bathroom. It was cramped and cold and smelled like fertilizer. It was the most beautiful thing Micah had seen in years. He had a roof, he had a chew. He had something approximating a reason to wake up in the morning. The work was simple. He walked the grounds each night, making sure no one vandalized the graves or broke into the office. He mowed grass during the day when funerals weren't scheduled. He cleaned leaves from the pathways and trimmed hedges and did whatever other tasks Carol needed. She paid him in cash every Friday, $200. That felt like a fortune after years of nothing. Micah settled into a routine that bordered on peaceful. He ate cheap food from the bodega 3 blocks away. He kept himself clean with the building's utility sink. He avoided the other cemetery workers who looked at him with suspicion or pity. He existed in a kind of suspended animation, not quite healing, but no longer actively falling apart. He still thought about Emma and Lily, but the thoughts had lost their sharp edges. The memories played out like scenes from someone else's life, distant and detached. He wondered sometimes where they were, if Lily still drew pictures, if she remembered him at all. He wondered if Emma had found someone stable to give them the life he couldn't. He hoped she had. That hope was the closest thing to grace he could manage. 3 weeks ago, Micah saw a woman arrive at the cemetery offices in a black Mercedes. She wore an expensive coat and sunglasses despite the overcast weather, and she moved with the kind of confidence that comes from never having had to worry about money. Micah was trimming the hedge near the parking lot, trying to be invisible, as always. but he watched her enter the building and emerge 20 minutes later with paperwork. She walked past him on the way to her car. She didn't look at him, didn't acknowledge his existence. But Micah saw her face and something in his chest twisted painfully. She was maybe 40, beautiful in the way as successful people are beautiful, with good skin and better posture and an aura of command. She looked the way Emma might look now if life had been kinder, if choices had been different, if everything hadn't fallen apart. The woman drove away, and Micah stood there with his hedge trimmers hanging useless in his hands, breathing hard, his vision blurring. He realized with sudden clarity that he had never actually grieved. He had survived and endured and existed, but he had never allowed himself to feel the full weight of what he had lost. The realization hit him like a fist, like drowning, like every nightmare he had ever swallowed. He managed to finish his shift, somehow moving through the motions mechanically. That night alone in the storage building, Micah cried for the first time in 6 years. He cried for Emma and Lily and the yellow walls of the nursery. He cried for the man he used to be, the engineer who wrote code and pushed his daughter on swings and believed that hard work would be enough. He cried until he was empty, until there were no more tears, until he felt hollowed out and clean in a terrible kind of way. Something had shifted. The grief didn't make him want to die anymore. Instead, it made him want to matter, even in some small way. He wanted to prove that his life had value, that he wasn't just a ghost haunting the margins of the world. He wanted to save someone, anyone, because he couldn't save his family and couldn't save himself, but maybe, just maybe, he could save someone else. That's when he started paying closer attention to the people who came to Oakmont Cemetery, the families who buried their loved ones, the workers who lowered the caskets, the doctors who signed the death certificates. The business of death, it turned out, had patterns just like any other business. And if you watched carefully enough, sometimes those patterns revealed things that weren't meant to be seen. 2 nights ago, Micah was checking the back gate near the service road at 11 p.m. when he heard voices. The gate was supposed to be locked after dark, but he had noticed recently that someone had been leaving it unlatched. He approached quietly, moving through the shadows between monuments, following his instinct more than any actual security protocol. A black Mercedes sat idling near the fence line, its headlights off, but its engine running. 2 figures stood next to it, silhouetted against the ambient light from the city beyond the cemetery walls. Their voices carried in the still night air, sharp with tension and urgency. Micah froze behind a large marble angel, every muscle locked, barely breathing. The first voice belonged to a man educated and angry. He spoke with the clipped precision of someone trying to control a situation that was spiraling. The drug worked. She's cold now, heart rate imperceptible, body temperature dropped. Every test shows death. Tomorrow we bury her early before 9 a.m., before anyone questions anything. The second voice was older, shaking with fear. Peter, I can't. This is too much. I signed in the death certificate, but an autopsy, if anyone requests it, they'll find the compound. They'll trace it back to the prescriptions. I'll lose everything. Peter's response came fast and hard. You'll lose everything if you don't follow through. Do you understand me, Mason? I own you now. You signed those prescriptions. You administered the final dose. You declared her dead. If this falls apart, you go down first and hardest. Do exactly as I say and you walk away rich. Deviate and you rot in prison. Micah's heart hammered so hard he thought they might hear it. His mind raced, connecting pieces that didn't want to fit together. Peter and Mason, a woman declared dead but not actually dead, a burial scheduled quickly, too quickly, the black Mercedes that looked like the one he had seen earlier, the one that belonged to the woman in the expensive coat. Dr. Keating's voice came out as a whimper. What if someone asks questions? What if her family wants a second opinion? Peter's laugh was cold enough to freeze blood. Her family trusts me. Her company trusts me. And by tomorrow afternoon, she'll be 6 feet underground in a cement grave. No one will question a tragic death from natural causes. No one will suspect that her devoted husband couldn't stand living in her shadow anymore. Now go home, get some sleep, and tomorrow play your part perfectly. Car doors opened and closed. The Mercedes backed up and turned its headlights, sweeping across the cemetery as it pulled away. Micah stayed frozen behind the angel statue for 10 more minutes, his legs shaking, his mind spinning. He had just heard a murder plot, not a hypothetical or a fantasy, but an actual murder that was happening right now that would be completed in less than 12 hours. He stumbled back to the storage building and sat on his cot, staring at the wall. Every instinct screamed at him to call the police to report what he had heard, but he had no proof. No recording, no witnesses, just the word of a homeless man against a doctor and a wealthy husband. The police would laugh him out of the station or arrest him for wasting their time. Without evidence, without credibility, without anything to back up his story, he was powerless. Except he wasn't powerless. Not completely. He knew when the burial was scheduled. He knew it was happening at Oakmont on his watch in his cemetery. He could be there. He could interrupt it. He could force them to check, to look closer to see what was hidden under the surface. They might not believe him, might call him crazy, might throw him out, but at least he would have tried. Micah barely slept that night. He lay on his cot, running through scenarios, imagining how it would play out, trying to prepare for the moment when he would have to step forward and risk everything. He thought about Emma and Lily, about how he had failed to protect them. He thought about all the times he had been invisible, dismissed, ignored. This was his chance to matter, to prove that even a man who had lost everything could still do something that mattered. When dawn came, Micah was ready. He had washed his face and trimmed his beard as best he could with a disposable razor. He had put on his cleanest uniform and made sure his name badge was visible. He looked like what he was, a cemetery worker, humble and unremarkable, but he felt different. He felt like he was about to change something, like he was about to step into a moment that would define the rest of his life. The funeral was scheduled for 8 a.m. Micah watched the setup from a distance, saw the white drapes being erected, saw the workers positioning the expensive casket beside the grave that he himself had helped prepare yesterday. He saw the cement lining the bottom of the pit, an unusual detail that now made terrible sense. If someone was still alive, the cement would trap them, would prevent any chance of survival, even if they woke up underground. The guests began arriving at 7:45. Expensive cars lined up along the cemetery roads, disgorging people in black designer clothes. Micah positioned himself at the back near his wheelbarrow, full of tools, trying to look busy, while his heart tried to beat its way out of his chest. He saw Peter arrive, playing the grieving husband with an Oscar-worthy performance. He saw Dr. Keating pale and sweating despite the cool morning air. And he saw the casket, gold and gleaming, with a woman inside who might still be alive. Who was alive, he corrected himself. Who was alive and running out of time. Micah's hands gripped the wheelbarrow handles so hard his knuckles went white. He counted down the minutes, waiting for the right moment, the moment when his interruption would be impossible to ignore. The ceremony began. The pastor droned through familiar prayers. The crowd settled into the uncomfortable anticipation of watching a casket be lowered into the ground. And Micah felt something shift in the air, some cosmic alignment of chance and choice in desperate need. This was the moment. This was his moment. He would either save her or fail spectacularly, but he could not stay silent. He dropped the wheelbarrow and started walking forward, and the rest was chaos and hope, and a voice tearing itself free from 6 years of silence. The crowd turned. The phones started recording. And Micah Dalton, nobody from nowhere, stepped into the light and said the words that would change everything. "Stop. Don't bury her. She's not dead." Samantha's eyes snapped open. The crowd gasped as one organism, a collective inhale that sucked the air from the cemetery. Her irises, dark brown and dilated, rolled wildly before focusing on the canvas ceiling above her. Her chest heaved upward with a ragged breath that sounded like ripping fabric. The white rose between her hands tumbled onto the satin lining of the casket as her fingers uncurled, trembling, reaching for something that wasn't there. Aunt Helen sobbed openly, her carefully maintained composure shattering like porcelain dropped on concrete. The woman in the purple coat fell to her knees, her phone clattering onto the carpet as her hands came together in frantic prayer. A man in the third row vomited into the grass, the sound wet and horrified. Phones captured everything, dozens of angles, recording the moment a dead woman clawed her way back to life. Samantha's lips parted and a sound emerged, raw and broken. Her vocal cords hadn't been used in days, and the word came out mangled, barely recognizable as human speech. But Micah heard it clearly. "Help." He leaned over the casket, his rough hands gentle as he supported her head. His voice shook but held steady. "You're safe now, ma'am. You're safe. We've got you." Samantha's eyes found his face, trying to focus through the fog of whatever drug had stolen her body's function. She saw the overgrown beard, the name badge, the blue uniform stained with grass and dirt. She saw a stranger who somehow knew to save her when her own husband had tried to ensure she died. Her hand lifted, weak and shaking fingers brushing against Micah's sleeve, as if to confirm he was real. Peter stood frozen for 3 full seconds, his face cycling through expressions too quickly to track. Shock melted into rage, rage twisted into calculation, calculation hardened into something desperate and dangerous. His hand disappeared into his coat pocket and emerged gripping a syringe filled with cloudy liquid that caught the morning light like poison. Micah saw it and his body reacted before his mind caught up, shoving himself between Peter and the casket. His arms spread wide, making himself a barrier, making himself a target. The years of being invisible, of making himself small and forgettable, evaporated in the face of absolute certainty. Peter would have to go through him to finish what he started. Stay back. Micah's voice came out low and dangerous, a sound he didn't recognize as his own. Stay the hell away from her. Peter's mask cracked completely. The devoted husband disappeared, replaced by something feral and cornered. He lunged forward, the syringe raised like a weapon, his face contorted with fury that bordered on madness. She belongs in the ground, he screamed, spittle flying from his lips. She was supposed to stay dead. Everything was supposed to be mine. 2 men in dark suits intercepted him before the syringe could find a target. They grabbed his arms, wrestling him backward as Peter thrashed like an animal caught in a trap. The syringe flew from his grip, arcing through the air before landing in the grass with a small thud. Peter's screams escalated into incoherence, in pretense of sanity, abandoned. No, no, she has to die. Don't you understand? I can't go back to nothing. I won't go back. More hands joined the effort to restrain him. The security guards who had earlier tried to remove Micah now pinned Peter to the ground, pressing his face into the carpet while his legs kicked uselessly. His expensive suit bunched and tore. His carefully styled hair fell across his forehead in sweaty strands. The transformation from grieving husband to exposed criminal took less than 30 seconds. Dr. Keating tried to run. He turned and pushed through the crowd, his expensive shoes slipping on the damp grass as he sprinted toward the parking area. But Aunt Helen had been watching him, had seen the guilt written across his face from the moment Samantha's throat first twitched. She stuck out her leg with perfect timing. Keating went down hard, his arms pinwheeling as he lost balance. He crashed face first into a marble headstone, the impact producing a sound like a hammer hitting meat. Blood streamed from his nose as he pushed himself up, dazed and whimpering. 2 younger men from the crowd tackled him before he could regain his footing, dragging him back toward the gathering with his arms twisted behind his back. The pastor stood clutching his Bible with both hands, his mouth opening and closing like a fish drowning in air. Around him, chaos reigned. People shouted over each other, their voices creating a wall of sound that made comprehension impossible. Some rushed toward the casket to help Samantha. Others backed away, afraid or disgusted or simply overwhelmed. The phones never stopped recording their red lights, blinking like mechanical witnesses that would remember everything. Samantha tried to sit up, but her muscles wouldn't cooperate properly. The drug had left her body weak and uncoordinated, her nervous system still rebooting after days of artificial hibernation. Micah supported her shoulders while Aunt Helen worked to remove the viewing window from the casket lid, giving Samantha more room to breathe. The young man in the expensive suit appeared with a bottle of water, unscrewing the cap with shaking hands. Peter continued screaming from his position on the ground, his voice muffled by the carpet pressed against his mouth. I loved her, and she destroyed me. Everything I did was for us. She never saw me. She only saw her empire, her precious company. I was just decoration, just the husband who smiled at parties. I deserve more. I earned more. The crowd went silent at his words, the confession ringing through the cemetery like a bell announcing judgment. Phones tilted closer, zooming in on Peter's contorted face. The woman in the purple coat picked up her phone from where she had dropped it, her hand steadying as she captured Peter's complete psychological collapse. This wasn't just footage of an interrupted funeral anymore. This was evidence of attempted murder confession and the unraveling of a man who had hidden his true self behind expensive suits and practiced grief. Samantha's voice emerged stronger, each word clearer than the last, despite the hoarseness. She stared across the distance, separating her from Peter, her eyes burning with betrayal that cut deeper than any physical wound. You were my husband. I trusted you with everything. What did I ever do to deserve this? Peter's laughter came out strangled and bitter. You existed. You succeeded. You had everything, and you never thought about what that meant for me. Standing next to you was like standing next to the sun. Everyone looked at you, and I disappeared. Do you know what that's like being invisible in your own marriage? Being introduced as Samantha Fairchild's husband instead of Peter Fairchild, his own person. The sirens Micah had heard earlier grew louder. Multiple vehicles approaching fast. Red and blue lights flickered through the trees at the cemetery's entrance, painting the white drapes in alternating colors. 4 police cruisers raced down the narrow cemetery road, their tires throwing up gravel. Officers emerged before the cars fully stopped, hands on their weapons, taking in the scene with quick professional assessment. The lead officer, a woman in her 40s with steel gray hair, pulled back in a tight bun, approached with her badge held high. Philadelphia Police. Everyone stepped back from the civilians on the ground. Her eyes swept the gathering, cataloging the casket with its living occupant, the man restrained on the carpet, the doctor bleeding from his broken nose. Someone want to explain what's happening here? Aunt Helen stepped forward, her voice carrying the authority of old money and moral certainty. Officer, my niece, Samantha Fairchild, was declared dead 3 days ago. Her husband and her doctor conspired to poison her with a substance that mimicked death. They planned to bury her alive this morning. This man, she gestured to Micah, overheard their plan and saved her life. We have witnesses, recordings, and physical evidence. She pointed to the syringe lying in the grass. That contains the same poison they used. The officer's expression shifted from skepticism to sharp focus. She radioed for backup and EMTs, her words clipped and efficient. Then she approached the casket where Samantha lay, supported by Micah and several mourners. Ma'am, are you able to speak? Can you confirm what happened to you? Samantha's voice shook, but her words came clear. My husband poisoned me. My doctor helped him. They declared me dead and planned to bury me before anyone could question it. If this man hadn't intervened, she turned her gaze to Micah, I would have woken up in the ground. If I woke up at all. The officer's jaw tightened. She turned to her colleagues, arrest both men. Charges include attempted murder, conspiracy, medical malpractice, and fraud. Read them their rights, get statements from everyone here, and someone collect that syringe as evidence. 2 officers hauled Peter to his feet. His struggles had exhausted him, and he hung between them like a puppet with cut strings. They recited his Miranda rights while he muttered incoherently about empires and shadows and justice. The fight had drained out of him, replaced by hollow-eyed shock as he seemed to finally understand the magnitude of what he had lost. Dr. Keating didn't resist when they cuffed him. Blood still dripped from his nose onto his dress shirt, creating dark stains that spread like accusations. His voice came out thick and nasal. I want a lawyer. I'm not saying anything without a lawyer. But his eyes told a different story, filled with regret and terror, and the dawning realization that his comfortable life had just evaporated. Ambulances arrived minutes later, their EMTs rushing toward the casket with equipment and urgent questions. They checked Samantha's vitals, shining lights in her eyes and wrapping a blood pressure cuff around her arm. One of them, a young woman with kind eyes, spoke gently. Ma'am, we need to transport you to the hospital. Whatever was in your system needs to be identified and treated properly. Can you tell me how you're feeling? Samantha's response came with surprising firmness, weak but coherent. My thinking is clear, even if my body isn't cooperating yet. I want a full toxicology screen. I want every test documented, and I want samples preserved as evidence. The EMT nodded, impressed by Samantha's presence of mind despite her ordeal. They transferred her carefully from the casket to a gurney, securing straps across her body while maintaining her dignity with blankets and gentle handling. Aunt Helen climbed into the ambulance without asking permission, gripping Samantha's hand like she might disappear if contact broke. Before the ambulance doors closed, Samantha turned her head toward Micah, who stood apart from the crowd, forgotten again, now that the crisis had passed. Her voice cut through the chaos. You, don't leave. I need to know who you are. I need to thank you properly. Micah nodded, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. The ambulance doors slammed shut, and the vehicle pulled away, its siren wailing as it navigated between the parked cars and shocked mourners. Micah watched it disappear around a curve in the cemetery road, feeling the adrenaline that had sustained him finally beginning to ebb. The lead officer approached him, her notepad open and pen poised. Your name and how you came to be involved in this situation. Micah Dalton, I work here as night security and groundskeeper. 2 nights ago, I overheard Peter Fairchild and Dr. Keating discussing their plan near the back gate. They didn't know I was there. He recounted everything he had heard, each word carefully chosen and delivered with the weight of truth. The officer wrote quickly, occasionally asking clarifying questions. Around them, other officers took statements from the stunned mourners. Phones were collected as evidence, their recordings preserved and logged. The syringe disappeared into an evidence bag. The entire scene transformed from funeral to crime scene, yellow tape marking boundaries, while forensics photographed the casket, the grave, the scattered funeral flowers. Pastor Green sat on a folding chair with his head in his hands, his faith shaken by the revelation that he had nearly participated in murder. The cemetery workers huddled together, speaking in low voices about how they had helped position a casket that held a living woman. The guests drifted in small groups toward their cars, shell-shocked and eager to leave, but trapped by the police who needed everyone's information. The woman in the purple coat approached Micah, her phone still in her hand but no longer recording. "I'm Diane Reeves, investigative journalist for the Philadelphia Inquirer. I was here covering what I thought would be a society funeral. Instead, I just witnessed the story of the year." She extended her card with fingers that still trembled slightly. "When you're ready to talk, please call me. The city deserves to know what you did." Micah took the card but said nothing. He wasn't ready for media attention, wasn't sure he ever would be. The idea of his face on the news, his story dissected by strangers, made his skin crawl. But he pocketed the card because refusing it seemed rude, and he had spent too many years trying not to be noticed to start causing offense now. The sun climbed higher, burning away the last of the morning mist. The white funeral drapes fluttered in a breeze that carried the smell of cut grass and overturned earth. Oakmont Cemetery had seen a lot of death over its 100-year history, but it had never witnessed a resurrection quite like this. 3 weeks later, the preliminary hearing packed the Philadelphia Municipal Courthouse to capacity. Every seat was filled, every inch of standing room claimed by reporters, curious citizens, and legal observers who recognized this case as something extraordinary. Outside, protesters held signs, "Justice for Samantha," and locked them up. News vans lined the street, their satellite dishes pointed skyward like mechanical flowers seeking sun. Samantha entered through a side door to avoid the crowd, flanked by Aunt Helen and her security detail. She had recovered her strength over the weeks of hospital care and intensive therapy. The toxicology report had identified a rare compound, tetrodotoxin derivative, that required specialized knowledge to synthesize and administer. Only someone with Dr. Keating's expertise could have calibrated the dosage precisely enough to mimic death without causing actual death. She wore a navy suit that projected power tempered with vulnerability. Her hair was pulled back, simply no jewelry beyond small diamond studs that had been her mother's. She wanted the jury to see her as a survivor, not as the billionaire CEO that tabloids had spent weeks dissecting. The media had feasted on the story, every detail of her marriage and career examined under microscope intensity. Micah sat in the back row, uncomfortable in a donated suit that didn't quite fit his frame. Samantha had offered to buy him new clothes to set him up in an apartment, to thank him properly with the resources at her disposal. But Micah had refused everything except a modest room in a boarding house and help finding proper employment. The attention made him anxious. The gratitude felt unearned. He had done what anyone should have done, nothing more. But Samantha insisted he attend the hearing. "You're the key witness," she had told him during one of their few meetings. "Without your testimony, they might have found a way to spin this differently. Your presence matters." So Micah came, sitting as far from the cameras as possible while his stomach churned with nerves. Peter entered in an orange jumpsuit, his hands cuffed in front of his body. 3 weeks in jail had aged him a decade. His skin had gone sallow, his eyes sunken into dark hollows. The expensive hairstyling had grown out, revealing gray roots and a receding hairline he had hidden with careful cuts. He looked small and pathetic, all swagger, stripped away by the reality of his situation. Dr. Keating followed moments later, equally diminished. His nose still bore evidence of his collision with the headstone, healing crooked, because he had refused to let the jail medical staff reset it properly. His lawyer, an overworked public defender, looked exhausted before proceedings even began. Judge Helena Brooks entered, and the room rose as one. She was known for her no-nonsense approach and intolerance for theatrics. Her silver hair and sharp reading glasses gave her the appearance of a strict librarian, but her reputation was built on fairness and careful consideration of evidence. She settled into her chair and surveyed the packed courtroom with an expression that suggested she had seen everything and was impressed by nothing. The prosecution's opening statement laid out the case with surgical precision. Peter Fairchild, consumed by resentment of his wife's success, had conspired with Dr. Mason Keating to murder Samantha Fairchild and disguise it as natural death. Financial records showed Peter would have inherited controlling interest in Vantage Tech Industries, plus assets worth approximately $3 billion. Keating had been promised $5 million and protection for his gambling debts that had spiraled out of control. The prosecutor, a sharp woman named Rachel Chen, presented evidence methodically. Financial transfers between Peter and Keating's offshore accounts. Text messages discussing timing and dosage. Security footage of Peter purchasing unusual chemical compounds through dark web vendors. And most damning, the recording from Diane Reeves's phone that captured Peter's breakdown at the funeral, his screamed confession that everything was supposed to be his. The defense tried to paint Peter as a man driven to temporary insanity by the stress of an unbalanced marriage. Their psychiatrist testified about the psychological impact of living in a spouse's shadow, about how resentment could build until rational thought collapsed. But the premeditation was too clear, the planning too detailed. This wasn't a crime of passion. This was calculated murder stretched over months of careful preparation. Micah took the stand on the hearing's second day. The prosecutor guided him through his testimony with gentle questions, establishing his employment at the cemetery and the events of that night 2 weeks ago. Micah spoke clearly, his rough voice carrying through the courtroom's excellent acoustics. He described the overheard conversation, repeated the words as he remembered them, explained why he had chosen to act rather than simply call the police. Peter's defense attorney tried to shake him during cross-examination, suggesting that Micah had misheard, that his years of homelessness might have affected his reliability, that he had a financial motive to lie if Samantha was paying him. But Micah didn't flinch. His poverty was a matter of record, not shame. His memory was clear and supported by physical evidence, and he had refused every offer of reward beyond basic necessities. The defense attorney made one critical mistake. He asked Micah why he cared why a cemetery worker would risk his job and safety to save a stranger. Micah's response silenced the courtroom. Because I failed to save my own family when they needed me. I lost my daughter, my wife, everything that mattered. I couldn't save them, but I could save her. And if that makes me unreliable, then I guess I'm unreliable. But I'm telling the truth. Several jurors wiped their eyes. The defense attorney sat down without further questions. Dr. Keating took a plea deal on the third day. His lawyer had convinced him that fighting was futile given the evidence. He agreed to testify against Peter in exchange for a reduced sentence. When he took the stand, his testimony destroyed any remaining doubt about the conspiracy's scope. Keating described how Peter had approached him 6 months earlier with the initial proposition, how they had researched compounds that could create the appearance of death, how Peter had paid for Keating's gambling debts in exchange for his cooperation, how they had tested dosages on laboratory animals before administering the final cocktail to Samantha, how Keating had falsified medical records and rushed the death certificate to prevent autopsy. His voice broke as he described the moment he declared Samantha dead, knowing she was still alive. I told myself it would be quick, that she wouldn't suffer. I told myself I was saving myself and my family from ruin. But I knew what I was doing. I knew it was murder. And I did it anyway because I was weak and scared and thought I could live with it. But I can't. I can't live with what we almost did. Peter's face remained impassive throughout Keating's testimony, but his hands clenched and unclenched beneath the table. When his turn came to speak, his lawyer advised against it, but Peter insisted. He took the stand with his jaw set and his eyes defiant. The prosecutor asked simple questions. Did you conspire to murder your wife? Did you administer poison? Did you plan to bury her alive? Peter answered each with variations of yes, but with justifications that grew increasingly unhinged. She had made him invisible. She had stolen his identity. She deserved to lose everything the way he had lost everything. His testimony became a rambling confession mixed with accusations, a man so convinced of his own victimhood that he couldn't see the monstrous nature of his actions. When the prosecutor asked if he regretted his choices, Peter leaned forward and spoke directly to Samantha, who sat in the front row. I regret nothing. You destroyed me long before I tried to destroy you. At least I had the courage to act. The courtroom erupted. Judge Brooks hammered her gavel repeatedly, calling for order. But the damage was done. Peter's complete lack of remorse, his twisted logic, his refusal to accept responsibility, it all played out in front of jurors, reporters, and cameras that would broadcast his words across the nation. The hearing concluded with Judge Brooks's ruling. She found sufficient evidence to proceed to trial on all charges: attempted murder, conspiracy, fraud, and medical malpractice. She set bail at $10 million for Peter, an amount he couldn't access since his assets were frozen. Dr. Keating's plea deal was accepted, sentencing delayed until after Peter's trial concluded. As officers led Peter away, he turned one last time to look at Samantha. His expression held no remorse, only bitter accusation. She met his gaze steadily, her face revealing nothing. The man she had married no longer existed, if he ever had. In his place was a stranger wearing Peter's features, a stranger whose hatred had nearly killed her. Samantha exited through the side door again, avoiding the press that shouted questions from behind barriers. But she stopped when she saw Micah standing alone near the building's service entrance, clearly uncomfortable with the crowd and attention. She approached him while her security team maintained a respectful distance. "Thank you," the words felt inadequate for what he had done, but they were all she had. "You gave me my life back. I don't know how to repay that." Micah shook his head, his discomfort obvious. "You don't owe me anything, ma'am. I just did what needed doing. Anyone would have." "No." Samantha's voice was firm. "Not anyone. Most people would have convinced themselves they misheard, or that it wasn't their business, or that calling the police was enough. You risked everything with nothing to gain. That's not common. That's extraordinary." They stood in awkward silence for a moment, two people from completely different worlds connected by circumstances neither had chosen. Finally, Samantha spoke again. "I'd like to help you rebuild your life, not as payment, but as someone who understands what it means to start over. Please let me try." Micah met her eyes and saw genuine care there, not pity or obligation. He nodded slowly, accepting what he couldn't refuse without causing offense. "Maybe we can talk about it," he said, "after everything settles, after the trial, when things are less complicated." Samantha smiled, and for the first time since waking up in that casket, the expression reached her eyes. "When things are less complicated," she agreed, "though I suspect that might take a while." She walked toward her waiting car while Micah watched, then turned back to face him one more time. "The thing you said on the stand about your family. I'm sorry. Whatever happened, whatever you lost, I'm truly sorry. You deserve better than that." Micah's throat tightened. He managed a nod before she disappeared into the vehicle. The car pulled away and he stood alone in the alley, feeling the weight of the past weeks pressing down like physical force. He had saved a life. He had mattered. And somehow, in the process of pulling someone else from the grave, he had taken his first real step back toward the light. The trial lasted 6 weeks. Every day brought new revelations that the media devoured like starving wolves. Financial experts testified about offshore accounts and shell companies. Technology specialists explained how Peter had covered his digital tracks. Pharmacologists detailed the compound's effects on human physiology, describing how a person could remain conscious for minutes after administration before the paralysis set in completely. Samantha attended every session, sitting in the same front row seat with the same expression of controlled composure. She listened as prosecutors dismantled her marriage piece by piece, revealing lies that stretched back to the moment Peter had introduced himself at that Boston conference. His consulting firm had been failing even then. His family wealth was fiction. The man she had loved had never actually existed beyond the character he performed. The jury deliberated for 7 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all counts. Peter showed no emotion as the judge sentenced him to life imprisonment without possibility of parole. Dr. Keating, having cooperated fully, received 25 years with possibility of parole after 15. Both men were remanded, immediately led away in chains while cameras captured their final moments of freedom. Samantha felt nothing when the verdicts were read. Not satisfaction, not vindication, just a hollow exhaustion that came from closing a chapter written in poison and betrayal. Aunt Helen squeezed her hand and whispered that justice had been served. But justice felt less like victory and more like acknowledgement that some things once broken could never be repaired. The media circus followed her out of the courthouse and pursued her for weeks afterward. Every magazine wanted an exclusive interview. Every talk show extended invitations. Publishers offered 7-figure advances for her memoir. But Samantha refused them all, issuing a single statement through her lawyers: "I survived." That's all the story anyone needs. What she didn't say publicly was that survival required more than breathing. It required rebuilding, reimagining, learning how to exist in a world where trust had become a foreign concept. She threw herself into that reconstruction with the same intensity she had once brought to building Vantage Tech, except this time the project was herself. Therapy sessions filled her Tuesday and Thursday afternoons. Dr. Patricia Morris, a trauma specialist who worked exclusively with violent survivors, guided Samantha through the psychological aftermath of attempted murder. They discussed trust issues and hypervigilance, the way Samantha now checked her food obsessively and woke up gasping from nightmares where she was buried alive. Progress came in increments too small to measure day by day, but visible across weeks. The nightmares were the worst. Samantha would jolt awake at 3 a.m., her sheets soaked with sweat, the sensation of dirt filling her mouth still vivid enough to taste. She kept lights on throughout the penthouse, unable to tolerate darkness that reminded her of the casket. Some nights she didn't sleep at all, just sat by the floor-to-ceiling windows and watched the city breathe, proving to herself that she was alive and free. Work provided structure but not solace. Vantage Tech had continued operating during her absence and trial, managed competently by her executive team. But returning to the office felt like visiting a museum dedicated to her former life. Everything looked the same, yet felt fundamentally altered. Employees who used to greet her warmly now approached with careful sympathy, their eyes reflecting pity she couldn't stand. 3 months after the trial, Samantha sat in her corner office reviewing quarterly projections when her assistant buzzed. Micah Dalton was in the lobby asking if she had time to speak. Samantha's pulse quickened, though, whether from anxiety or something else she couldn't identify. She hadn't seen him since the trial's conclusion, respecting his clear desire for privacy while fighting the urge to check on the man who had saved her life. Send him up. She stood and smoothed her skirt, suddenly self-conscious about the executive armor of designer clothes and perfect makeup. When Micah entered, she barely recognized him. The overgrown beard was gone, revealing a strong jaw and a face younger than she had assumed. His hair was cut short and neat. He wore simple clothes, jeans, and a button-down shirt, but they fit properly and looked clean. His eyes still carried that wounded quality, but something else had emerged alongside the pain. Something that looked almost like hope. They sat in the informal seating area rather than across her imposing desk. Samantha poured coffee from the pot her assistant had delivered, her hands steady despite the strange nervousness fluttering in her chest. Micah accepted the cup with a quiet thank you and held it without drinking, using it as something to occupy his hands. "You look well?" Samantha's voice came out softer than she intended. "How are you managing?" Micah's smile was small but genuine. "Better. The boarding house is decent. Mrs. Chen, who runs it, is kind, doesn't ask too many questions. I've been eating regularly, sleeping most nights. It's an adjustment having a door that locks and knowing I'll still be there tomorrow." He paused, his fingers tightening around the coffee cup. "I came because I wanted to talk about your offer. To help me rebuild, if it's still available. I think I'm ready now. I think I can accept help without feeling like I'm taking charity." Samantha felt warmth spread through her chest. Relief mixed with something she refused to examine too closely. "The offer stands. It will always stand. What do you need?" What followed was a conversation that stretched through the afternoon and into evening, both of them losing track of time as they talked. Micah explained about his background in software engineering, how he had once been skilled at solving complex problems before unemployment, and homelessness had stripped away his confidence. He talked about wanting to work again to prove he hadn't lost his technical abilities along with everything else. Samantha listened with growing realization that Micah wasn't asking for a handout. He was asking for a chance. She could give him that. More than that, she could give him a purpose that matched his capabilities. Vantage Tech had grown so large that small inefficiencies had crept into their systems. They needed someone who could identify problems and create elegant solutions, someone who understood technology but hadn't been corrupted by corporate politics. "I want to offer you a position. Not because you saved my life, though, that's true, but because I think you could genuinely help this company. We need someone who sees what others miss, who asks questions that make people uncomfortable. Someone who isn't afraid to tell me when something isn't working." She met his eyes directly. "Would you consider coming to work here as a special technical consultant? You'd report directly to me, no middle management to navigate. Your role would be to identify system weaknesses and propose solutions. Micah's expressions cycled through disbelief, hope, and fear. I've been out of the industry for years. Technology has changed. I might not be good enough anymore. Or you might bring a perspective we desperately need. Fresh eyes that haven't been trained to accept broken systems as normal. Samantha leaned forward. I'm not offering this lightly. I'm offering it because I need someone I can trust absolutely, and you've already proven your character in the most extreme circumstances possible. Everything else can be learned. Micah set down his coffee cup and stared at his hands calloused from years of manual labor. If I accept I do this right, no special treatment, no excuses. If I can't handle the work, you fire me like anyone else. I won't be your charity case. Agreed, though you should know I don't actually think you'll fail. Samantha extended her hand across the coffee table. Do we have a deal? Micah's handshake was firm, his skin rough against her manicured palm. The contact lasted a moment longer than professionally necessary, and when they released, Samantha felt an imprint of warmth that lingered. He started the following Monday. Samantha arranged for a modest office in the technical department and provided him with equipment and access to systems that would have been unthinkable in his previous life. She assigned him small projects, initially testing his skills while allowing him to rebuild confidence. Micah approached each task with intense focus, staying late into evenings and arriving early, afraid that rest might reveal incompetence. But incompetence never materialized. Within 2 weeks, Micah had identified a security vulnerability that had existed undetected for months. Within a month, he had streamlined their data processing protocols, saving the company thousands of hours annually. His solutions were elegant and practical, the work of someone who understood that the best code solved problems without creating new ones. The technical staff treated him with initial skepticism that gradually transformed into respect. They saw how he asked questions without ego, how he listened to junior developers as intently as senior architects, how he could explain complex concepts in language anyone could understand. He didn't try to impress or intimidate. He just worked, letting results speak for themselves. Samantha found excuses to check on his progress more frequently than necessary. She would stop by his office under the pretense of discussing a project, then find herself lingering as they talked about system architecture and user experience. Micah made her laugh with dry observations about corporate absurdities. He challenged her assumptions without being combative. He saw her as Samantha, not as the billionaire CEO or the woman who almost died, just as someone trying to build something worthwhile. She realized somewhere around the 3rd month of his employment that she was falling for him. Not the dramatic Hollywood version, but the quiet, inevitable kind that crept up through accumulated moments. The way he listened with complete attention. The way his rare smiles transformed his face. The way he treated everyone with the same careful respect regardless of their position or power. He was fundamentally decent in a way that reminded Samantha how rare that quality actually was. But Micah gave no indication of reciprocating her feelings. He maintained professional boundaries with careful consistency, calling her Ms. Fairchild in meetings, and keeping their interactions focused on work. If he noticed how her pulse quickened when he entered a room, if he saw how she orchestrated opportunities to be near him, he showed no sign. To him, she was his employer in savior roles that apparently precluded anything else. Samantha told herself to appreciate what they had without wanting more. She buried the feelings deep, focusing on the friendship that was developing naturally alongside their professional relationship. Some evenings they would stay late reviewing code, ordering takeout Chinese food, and eating directly from containers while debating the merits of various programming languages. Micah would share stories about his daughter, carefully edited versions that revealed his love without dwelling on his loss. Samantha would talk about the early days of Vantage Tech, about sleeping in that restaurant back room, and believing in a future that seemed impossible. During one of those late evenings, Micah looked up from his laptop and asked the question Samantha had been dreading. Why haven't you dated anyone since the divorce? The trial finalized your marriage dissolution months ago. You're young, successful, free, but you seem determined to stay alone. Samantha's fingers froze over her keyboard. The divorce had been expedited given Peter's imprisonment and the circumstances of his crimes. She was legally single, wealthy, and according to every magazine that profiled her, one of the most eligible women in America. But the thought of trusting someone again, of allowing another person close enough to hurt her, felt impossible. I don't know if I remember how to trust. Her honesty surprised her. Peter destroyed that part of me. How do you let someone in when you know what they're capable of? How do you believe anything anyone says after discovering your entire marriage was built on lies? Micah closed his laptop, giving her his full attention. You start small. You trust people with little things and see if they're reliable. You watch what they do more than what they say. And you forgive yourself when you get scared because being scared after what you experienced makes perfect sense. He paused. His voice dropping lower. I spent 4 years on the streets, afraid to connect with anyone, because I thought losing them would destroy me again. But that's not living. That's just surviving. You saved my life by giving me a second chance. Don't waste your own by hiding from possibilities. His words hit harder than Samantha expected. She blinked against sudden moisture in her eyes, turning away so he wouldn't see her vulnerability. You're right. I know you're right. It just feels safer to keep everyone at a distance. Safe isn't the same as good. Micah's voice carried hard-won wisdom. Sometimes the bravest thing is letting yourself be vulnerable again, even knowing the risk. Samantha wanted to tell him that he made her feel brave, that his presence in her life had done more to heal her than months of therapy. But the words stuck in her throat, held back by fear of rejection or worse, of pity. So she simply nodded and changed the subject back to work, letting the moment pass while her heart ached with things unsaid. The following month, Vantage Tech hosted a charity gala benefiting homelessness initiatives throughout Philadelphia. Samantha had insisted on the cause, using her platform to raise awareness and funds for people in situations Micah had survived. The event filled the grand ballroom of the Bellevue Hotel with Philadelphia's elite black-tie opulence, dedicated to helping the invisible. Micah attended, reluctantly uncomfortable in a rented tuxedo that made him feel like an imposter. But Samantha had asked him personally, explaining that his perspective was valuable, that donors needed to hear from someone who understood the reality behind the statistics. He agreed because refusing her felt impossible. Samantha watched him circulate through the crowd, explaining to wealthy donors how one medical emergency or job loss could send anyone spiraling into homelessness. He spoke without self-pity, just matter-of-fact descriptions of how systems failed and dignity eroded. People listened with rapt attention, checkbooks opening as Micah's stories made poverty real, rather than abstract. During a break between speakers, a woman approached Micah at the bar. She was perhaps 40, with warm brown eyes and an easy smile that suggested genuine kindness rather than networking calculation. She introduced herself as Elena Hayes, director of a nonprofit that provided job training for homeless populations. They fell into conversation naturally, comparing experiences and discussing program effectiveness. Samantha watched from across the room, champagne glass frozen halfway to her lips. She saw how Micah's posture relaxed around Elena, how he laughed at something she said with genuine pleasure. Elena touched his arm lightly during conversation, the gesture casual and unforced. They exchanged business cards that looked like more than professional courtesy. Jealousy hit Samantha like a physical blow. The emotion was unfair and unwelcome, but it flooded through her regardless. She had no claim on Micah. He had given her no encouragement. But watching him connect with Elena, seeing the possibility of something forming between them, hurt in ways Samantha wasn't prepared to handle. She excused herself from the donor she'd been speaking with and retreated to the hotel's terrace, needing air that didn't feel thick with her own disappointment. The September night was cool and clear, city lights stretching to the horizon. Samantha gripped the stone railing and allowed herself 60 seconds of pure emotion: grief, jealousy, regret, loneliness, before forcing it back down into the locked box where she kept everything that threatened her composure. Aunt Helen found her there, the older woman's heels clicking against the terrace stones. She stood beside Samantha without speaking, both of them staring at the city below. Finally, Helen's voice broke the silence. You care for him. It wasn't a question. Samantha considered denying it, but couldn't summon the energy for lies. Yes, I care for him, but he doesn't see me that way. I'm his employer, his savior, someone he respects, not someone he could love. Are you certain, or are you assuming based on fear? Helen's tone was gentle but direct. That young man looks at you like you're made of light, child, but he also looks at you like you're untouchable. Perhaps he thinks the distance between you is too great. Billionaire CEO and former homeless man, that's a canyon most people wouldn't dare try to cross. Samantha shook her head. It wouldn't matter. He's connecting with Elena. I saw them. Maybe that's better. She's kind and accessible and doesn't carry the baggage I do. He deserves someone who can give him uncomplicated happiness. And what do you deserve? Helen's question cut through Samantha's rationalization. Don't you deserve happiness too? Or are you going to punish yourself forever for Peter's crimes? Before Samantha could respond, the terrace door opened and Micah emerged, his eyes scanning until he found her. His expression shifted to concern. Are you all right? You disappeared suddenly and I wanted to make sure nothing was wrong. The simple kindness in his voice made Samantha's chest ache. She forced a smile that felt brilliant. I'm fine. Just needed some air. The crowd was overwhelming. Micah moved to stand beside her, his shoulder nearly touching hers as he leaned against the railing. I met someone tonight, Elena Hayes. She does amazing work with homeless populations. She asked if I'd be willing to speak at some of her events, share my story to help fundraising. That's wonderful. Samantha kept her voice carefully neutral. She seems very nice. She is. Micah's tone carried a warmth Samantha had rarely heard from him. It's strange feeling like someone sees me as just a person rather than a survivor or a hero or a project. She has no expectations beyond basic human connection. It's refreshing. You should pursue it. Samantha managed the words despite how they tasted like ash. You deserve to be happy, to build something normal and good with someone who understands you. Micah turned to look at her directly, his expression difficult to read in the dim terrace lighting. I think I will. Thank you, Samantha, for everything you've done, but especially for this, for helping me get to a place where I can even consider letting someone close again. He returned to the gala while Samantha remained on the terrace, Helen's hand finding hers and squeezing gently. The older woman said nothing, understanding that some heartbreaks required silence rather than commentary. Samantha stood there until the cold forced her back inside, where she spent the rest of the evening playing her role perfectly, while her carefully constructed walls held back an ocean of grief. The next months passed in a haze of work and forced normalcy. Micah and Elena's relationship developed slowly but steadily. He would mention their dates during casual office conversation dinner, at a small Italian restaurant, a weekend hike in the Wissahickon Valley, a concert where Elena's nephew played violin. Each mention landed like a small blade in Samantha's chest, but she smiled and encouraged him, asking appropriate follow-up questions while dying internally. Elena attended a company event as Micah's date, and Samantha forced herself to be gracious. They talked briefly about Elena's nonprofit work, and Samantha wrote a generous check on the spot. Elena was everything Samantha had predicted, kind, intelligent, grounded, and genuinely interested in Micah for who he was rather than what he represented. Hating her would have been easier than accepting that she was actually perfect for him. Samantha threw herself deeper into work, accepting speaking engagements and board positions that filled her schedule until exhaustion left no room for feeling. She expanded Vantage Tech into new markets, acquired two smaller companies, and launched initiatives that received positive press coverage. From the outside, she looked like a woman thriving. Inside, she felt hollowed out, going through motions, while the best parts of herself remained locked away where they couldn't be hurt again. Then she met Jonathan Reeves at a technology conference in San Francisco. He was a founder of a successful venture capital firm known for ethical investing and supporting diverse entrepreneurs. They sat on a panel together discussing innovation funding, and afterward, he approached her at the reception with a directness she appreciated. Your insights about sustainable growth were refreshing. Most people in this industry are so focused on explosive scaling that they ignore the human cost. Would you like to have dinner and continue the conversation? Samantha almost declined automatically. But something in his eyes, respect without reverence, interest without agenda, made her pause. He wasn't intimidated by her wealth or status. He didn't look at her like a survivor who needed protection. He saw a peer, an equal, someone whose intellect interested him. So she said yes, and they had dinner at a quiet restaurant where they debated market trends and social responsibility until staff started clearing tables around them. Jonathan called her the next day. They talked for 3 hours about everything except business books. They loved places they'd traveled, the absurdity of elite social circles they both navigated. He made her laugh with irreverent observations about industry pomposity. He asked her opinion about art and policy and existence itself, then actually listened to her answers. When he asked to see her again, Samantha found herself agreeing without the usual anxiety that accompanied vulnerability. Their relationship developed naturally over the following months. Jonathan flew to Philadelphia twice monthly when business allowed. Samantha visited San Francisco when her schedule permitted. They maintained independence while building genuine connection, two adults who had been burned before approaching something new with caution and care. Jonathan never pushed for more than Samantha was ready to give content to let their relationship unfold at its own pace. Micah noticed the change before Samantha acknowledged it to anyone else. During a late working session, he looked up from his screen and studied her face. "You seem lighter lately. Something's different. Good different." Samantha felt heat rise to her cheeks. "I've been seeing someone. Jonathan Reeves. He's based in San Francisco, but we're making it work. It's early still, but it's good. It feels healthy in a way nothing has felt since before." Micah finished for her, his smile genuine and warm. "I'm glad, Samantha. You deserve that kind of happiness. You deserve everything good." His sincerity was evident, and Samantha realized with bittersweet clarity that Micah had never seen her as anything beyond a friend and employer. Whatever feelings she'd harbored had existed only in her own imagination, projected onto someone who had never given her reason to hope. The realization hurt, but also brought relief. She could finally release expectations that had been weighing her down and fully embrace what was actually offered: friendship, respect, mutual regard. That was enough. It had to be enough. 8 months after meeting Elena, Micah asked Samantha to coffee one morning before work. They met at a small cafe near the office, claiming a corner table where morning light slanted through industrial windows. Micah's nervousness was obvious in how he stirred his coffee repeatedly, without drinking, how his fingers drummed against the table, how he couldn't quite meet her eyes. Finally, he set down his spoon and spoke in a rush. "I'm going to propose to Elena. I wanted to tell you first because you've become one of my closest friends, and because I wanted your blessing. I know that sounds strange, given our relationship, but your opinion matters to me." "What do you think?" Samantha's heart clenched, once sharp and final, then released. She reached across the table and took his hand, squeezing warmth and genuine affection into the gesture. "I think Elena is incredibly lucky. I think you're going to make each other happy, and I think you should absolutely propose because you light up when you talk about her." "That's how it should be." Relief flooded Micah's face. "Thank you. That means more than you know. You'll come to the wedding, right?" "It won't be anything elaborate, just small and simple, but I'd really like you there. I wouldn't miss it." Samantha's smile was real, constructed from hard-won acceptance and authentic happiness for him. "You've come so far. From where you were to where you are now, it's remarkable. You've earned this joy." They finished their coffee, talking about proposal plans and ring designs, and when they parted ways, Samantha felt something shift inside her. Not closure exactly, but evolution. The feelings she'd carried were transforming into something different, something that could exist alongside her relationship with Jonathan without diminishing either. She could care for Micah as a dear friend while building something real with someone else. Love didn't have to be singular or possessive. It could be expansive and generous, making room for multiple forms without competition. That evening, she called Jonathan and asked if he was free next month. For Micah's wedding, she explained, and then added with a vulnerability that still felt risky, "And I'd like you to meet Aunt Helen. I think it's time to introduce you to my family, if you're interested in that level of seriousness." Jonathan's voice carried warmth through the phone line. "I've been hoping you'd say something like that. I'd love to meet your aunt. And Samantha, I'm very interested in that level of seriousness. Whatever this is between us, I want to see where it goes." Micah's wedding took place on a Saturday afternoon in early spring, held in a small historic chapel in Chestnut Hill. The ceremony was intimate. Maybe 50 guests gathered in wooden pews to witness two people who had survived separate hells promise to build something better together. Elena wore a simple ivory dress and carried wildflowers. Micah wore a navy suit and couldn't stop smiling. Samantha attended with Jonathan at her side, both of them dressed elegantly but not ostentatiously. She had insisted on covering the reception costs as her gift to the couple, hosting dinner at a beautiful restaurant with private rooms and food that made people close their eyes in appreciation. Micah had protested, but eventually accepted, understanding that the gesture was about generosity rather than obligation. During the reception, Samantha found herself standing with Jonathan near the edge of the dance floor, watching Micah and Elena sway to their first dance as a married couple. The love between them was palpable and uncomplicated, the kind of straightforward happiness that came from two people who had been broken and healed together. Samantha felt no jealousy anymore, just deep satisfaction that Micah had found his way to this moment. Jonathan's arm wrapped around her waist, pulling her gently against his side. Remarkable man. To survive what he did and still have the capacity to love openly, that takes extraordinary courage. You gave him that chance. We gave each other chances. Samantha leaned into Jonathan's warmth. He saved my life, but in a way, I think we saved each other. We both needed to prove we could still matter, that we weren't defined by what had been done to us. She turned to look up at Jonathan's face. I'm glad you're here. I'm glad you're in my life. Jonathan kissed her forehead, a gesture that had become familiar and comforting. I'm not going anywhere. Whatever we're building, I want to see it through. 3 months later, Jonathan proposed during a weekend in Martha's vineyard. Nothing elaborate, just the two of them walking on the beach at sunset when he stopped and pulled a simple platinum band from his pocket. I love you. I respect you. I want to build a life with you that honors both of our independence while creating something new together. Will you marry me? Samantha said yes, with certainty that felt nothing like her first engagement. No doubts clouded this decision. Jonathan saw her completely and loved what he saw. He challenged her intellectually and supported her emotionally without trying to diminish or control. They had built something over months of careful attention, and she trusted it in ways that still surprised her. Their wedding was larger than Micah's, but still relatively modest by billionaire standards. 200 guests at a historic estate, elegant without being ostentatious. Micah and Elena sat in the front row, clapping and smiling as Samantha walked down the aisle toward Jonathan. The ceremony was brief and heartfelt, words chosen carefully to reflect commitment without religious overtones that neither bride nor groom believed in. When they exchanged rings, Samantha felt lighter than she had in years, as if she were shedding weight she hadn't realized she was carrying. At the reception, Micah approached to offer his congratulations. He hugged her warmly, genuine affection in the embrace. You deserve all of this. Thank you for inviting us. It means everything to be here. You're family now. Samantha's voice was firm. Not the family I was born into, but the family I've chosen. That matters more. Elena appeared at Micah's side, her hand resting on his arm with casual intimacy. The two women smiled at each other, recognizing something unspoken, but understood they both loved this complicated, damaged, remarkable man, and were grateful he had survived to find happiness. There was no competition here, no jealousy, just shared appreciation for someone who had earned joy. Life settled into new rhythms. Samantha and Jonathan split time between Philadelphia and San Francisco, managing their respective companies while building a home that accommodated both their ambitions. Micah continued at Vantage Tech, his role expanding as his confidence and skills flourished. He and Elena bought a small house in Mount Airy, filling it with secondhand furniture and a rescue dog named Willow. 14 months after their respective weddings, both couples welcomed babies within weeks of each other. Micah and Elena had a son they named Daniel after Micah's father, who had died when Micah was young. The boy had Elena's coloring and Micah's serious eyes, studying the world with intense curiosity even as an infant. Samantha and Jonathan had a daughter named Sophia Grace, her middle name honoring the second chance both parents had been given. Sophia arrived early and small but fierce, crying with impressive volume and gripping fingers with surprising strength. Holding her for the first time, Samantha felt something unlock in her chest, a capacity for love she had thought Peter had destroyed forever. But it was still there, just waiting for someone worthy of it. On a warm June evening, when both babies were 3 months old, Samantha invited Micah, Elena, and Daniel to her estate for dinner. They ate on the terrace as the sun set, filling the sky with colors that seemed too vivid to be real. The babies lay on blankets nearby, Sophia making experimental noises, while Daniel slept peacefully. Micah held a glass of wine and looked out across Samantha's manicured lawn, his expression peaceful in a way that still sometimes surprised her. I can't believe this is my life sometimes. A year ago, I was sleeping in that storage shed, convinced I'd never amount to anything again. Now I have a wife I love, a son, meaningful work friends I trust. It feels impossible. Nothing about it is impossible. Jonathan's voice was warm. You earned all of this through courage and integrity. Both of you did. He gestured to include Samantha in the statement. You faced darkness and chose to keep walking toward light. That's not luck. That's strength. Samantha picked up Sophia as the baby began to fuss, settling her daughter against her shoulder. We were both at the bottom, both convinced we'd lost everything that mattered. But we found ways to climb back up, and more importantly, we found reasons to want to climb. She met Micah's eyes across the space between them. You gave me the chance to live. I gave you the chance to build a life worth living. I'd say we're even. Micah's smile carried the weight of shared history and mutual understanding, from ashes to dawn. That's what this is. We both rose from places so dark we didn't think we'd see light again. But here we are. Elena shifted closer to her husband, her hand finding his. Here we are. And isn't it beautiful? They sat together as evening deepened into night. Two families bound by circumstance and choice by trauma survived, and futures built with intentional care. They talked and laughed while their children made infant sounds, creating new memories that would overlay the old scars. Not erasing them, scars were permanent, and that was okay, but adding context that made the scars matter less than what came after. Samantha looked around the terrace at the people gathered there, Jonathan solid and supportive, the partner she had never thought to find. Aunt Helen visiting for the weekend, her fierce love unchanged. Micah and Elena, unlikely friends who had become family, two babies representing possibility and renewal. This was her life now. Not the life she had planned, not the life she had once imagined, but a life built from rubble into something stronger than what had stood before. The night air carried the scent of roses from the garden below. Somewhere in the city, lights were coming on as people settled into their evenings. And on this terrace, suspended between earth and sky, 5 adults and 2 infants existed in a moment of perfect grace. They had all been broken in different ways. They had all survived circumstances that should have destroyed them. And they had all found their way to this exact point in space and time together, whole enough to appreciate the miracle of simply being alive. Micah raised his glass in a toast, his voice carrying across the terrace with quiet conviction, to second chances, to choosing to keep going even when giving up would be easier, to finding each other when we needed it most, to building something better from the ashes of what we lost. The others raised their glasses in response, the crystal catching the last light of day and throwing it back in fractured rainbows. They drank to survival and redemption, to love earned through suffering, to the long, hard journey from darkness into dawn. And in that moment, all of them understood that the real story wasn't about the funeral or the trial or the dramatic rescue. The real story was about what came after, about the patient work of reconstruction, about learning to trust and hope and live again despite every reason not to. From ashes to dawn, always dawn.